She could still feel the frog she had accidentally grabbed. Yes, the frog. She kept repeating the word, trying to calm herself down. She had not yet seen Jinchi since they returned from the hunting expedition. She assumed he would soon come to the Jade Pavilion on his routine rounds. She was not really looking forward to it. She continued to repeat the word frog to herself with the intensity of a monk reciting a sutra. Then two familiar faces entered the bath. An uneasy-looking young woman was there, and a palace lady attended her. The young woman had a cute face, but at the moment her brow was knitted in distress. Is that consort Lishu? Yes, and her chief lady-in-waiting was with her. Maomao watched them, wondering what they were doing there. Chapter 2 Seki Yu. I feel like I am being stared at, Maomao thought. By whom? It was the three people in front of her. Today's snack was steamed buns. Some of them contained red bean paste, but others were plain with no filling. Maomao, who was not very fond of sweet things, preferred those. She preferred leftover stewed vegetables to bean paste. In the Jade Pavilion, the ladies-in-waiting took their breaks in turns. Maomao was often on break with Hongniang or Yinghua. Recently, she had often been away from the pavilion entirely. Now she found herself on break with the three new girls. To be quite honest, she was uncomfortable. Maomao was not very good with people to begin with. It had been a full month since the new girls arrived, and she had only just started to remember their names. The three of them looked very similar. At first, Maomao thought it might simply be because they shared a hometown, but in fact they were sisters. Hakuyu, Kokuyu and Sekiyu, she repeated to herself. The names themselves weren't hard to remember. They simply meant white feather, black feather and red feather. Remembering which of the girls was which was the tricky part. She had already mixed them up several times. In exasperation, the girls each took to wearing a hairband that matched the color of their names. This was similar to what the special envoys had done. Finally, Maomao was able to remember who was who. They weren't triplets, but each had been born in successive years. Hakuyu was the oldest, followed by Kokuyu and then Sekiyu. They were quite beautiful, as was fitting for ladies in waiting to an upper consort. Their flowing eyebrows looked as if they had been drawn with charcoal. All of them had lovely almond-shaped eyes, but Maomao thought the middle girl, Kokuyu, had the strongest spirit. Are you not going to have any? Maomao asked. She had already sat down and begun eating one of the steamed buns. Tea was waiting for them. Gyuan, who had been on break just before they arrived, had prepared it. The leaves had been steeped previously, but it was still quite tasty. Sure, said the oldest sister, Hakuyu. She sat down, followed by Kokuyu and then Sekiyu. None of them said anything else. Maomao did not mind silence, but it made her feel a little strange to have people watch her eat. Perhaps they wanted to say something. If they did, she wished they would just say it. Maomao was not interested in trying to get them to speak. When speaking with superiors, it was one thing, but when dealing with colleagues, she wasn't going to go out of her way for people she didn't particularly like. They ended up eating their buns in silence. Perhaps the new girls felt they couldn't speak until Maomao did. They should have just chatted among themselves, not minding her, Maomao thought. She finished her snack and washed it down with the rest of her tea. Hakuyu, the young woman with the white hairband, looked at Maomao and finally spoke. She said, I have a question. If you don't mind. Her speech was deliberate and careful. Maomao had heard that Sekiyu, the youngest, was her own age. This meant Hakuyu must have been about 20 this year. That would make her as old as Jyokayu and older than Yinghua and the others. Maybe that explained how composed she was. How, if I may ask, did you come to serve in the Jade Pavilion? How? Well, there hadn't been enough hands at the Jade Pavilion. Jinchi had pressed her into service as a food taster at what he found to be a convenient moment. Maomao thought that Yinghua or one of the others had told the new girls this at some point. Yes, we know that, Hakuyu said, but that does not actually explain anything. Jyokayu is not quick to trust anyone, but she trusts you. Why, she wondered. She grimaced as she said Jyokayu, using no title or honorific. I see, Maomao thought. Perhaps Hakuyu felt close to Jyokayu as they were the same age. It shouldn't have been surprising if she was suspicious of an unknown person getting close to the consort. I am truly only a food taster. If someone were to try to poison consort Jyokayu, I would be the one to suffer the consequences. I ask that you view me in terms of that role. It was an honest answer. There was no particular need to tell her about the incident with the toxic face powder that had led to Maomao's introduction to Gyokaiu. They said you do not mince words. Turns out it is true. Thank you. Maomao wasn't sure if that was actually a compliment, but she bowed her head anyway. Hakuyu might have been a newcomer, but she did outrank Maomao after all. I also hear you have a lot of friends from outside the palace, but I hope you won't spend too much time socializing. My sisters and I are trying to figure out life in the rear palace. We get lonely when our more experienced colleagues spend all their time visiting. My youngest sister in particular. Hakuyu jabbed the youngest sister with her elbow, but Sekiyu, the girl with the red hairband, looked away as if to deny it. They weren't wrong, Maomao reflected. She had been spending a lot of time with Zyrolan and Shisui recently, and she now realized that hadn't been entirely appropriate. Ironically, she had promised Zyrolan and Shisui that she would go see them later today. Doing the consort's hair removal had become Maomao's job. If she dropped out now, the other two would have to scramble to cover for her. She was just fretting about what to do when she had a thought. She only needed someone to watch her, to ensure she didn't do anything suspicious, didn't she? Then why waste time? She said, let's go to the baths today. Huh, Sekiyu said, surprised by the invitation. The three sisters looked much alike, but their ages still made them distinct. Sekiyu seemed rather innocent. As long as she wasn't too brusque, Zyrolan and Shisui should be able to handle her easily enough, and Maomao would let them. When they heard the word baths, Hakuyu and Kokuyu looked at each other. Was it just Maomao's imagination, or did they share a grin for a fleeting second? That might be a good idea. Sekiyu, it would do you good to spend time with other girls who aren't your sisters. But sister, yeah, you might be right. Besides, Lady Gyokaiu ordered us to go to the baths sometimes. That's true. Scandal hunting was a job in itself in some sense. Maomao beckoned Sekiyu over to her. Kokuyu, why don't you come? Sekiyu ventured. Sorry, I have to work, have a nice time. The otherwise quiet second sister agreed with the eldest, leaving their younger sibling without much choice. Maomao meanwhile thought she'd started to grasp the sister's particular pecking order. I'm Sekiyu. Pleased to meet you, Sekiyu said nervously. Zyrolan and Shisui were bubbling with interest in Maomao's new companion. Ooh, Zyrolan said, do you have a new friend, Maomao? Well, I'll be, Shisui added. The two of them managed to surround Sekiyu all by themselves. Maomao ignored them and their quaking new acquaintance. She made sure she had everything she would need. She had a beauty salve in case the hair removal process irritated someone's skin, and a silk thread. She had wanted to bring the leftover textbooks from the pleasure district, hoping to sell some, but she gave up the idea. It would be too hard with Sekiyu along. Speaking of Sekiyu, she was looking at Maomao pleadingly. Evidently, she viewed Maomao as her safe harbor now that her sisters weren't around. I suppose I should rescue her, Maomao thought. She pointed toward the bath as if to say, let's go. Zyrolan and Shisui raised their hands and jogged off. Who are those people? Sekiyu asked. They're harmless, I think, Maomao added mentally. Then she trotted toward the baths herself. Wait for me, Sekiyu cried and rushed after her. The work wouldn't be that hard today. A number of additional massage givers had shown up recently. They looked into the baths and saw another palace woman giving a massage. Perhaps the other women had begun to notice when they realized that Maomao and the others were receiving small gifts from the consorts. The previous masseurs had clearly been better at concealing something. Maomao removed her clothing down to her apron in the changing room. Then she went into the bathing area with her bucket of tools. Sekiyu, however, just stood there looking uncomfortable. What is the matter? Zyrolan asked with genuine concern. Is this all we are wearing? Sekiyu questioned. Yes, it is. It gets hot in the bath if you have too many clothes on. Sekiyu seemed embarrassed. Shisui came up behind her with a wicked smirk. Then he grabbed her sash, tugging it loose. He pulled off Sekiyu's robe and held it up high. Huh, Maomao and Zyrolan exclaimed at the same time. They both seemed to be thinking the same thing. Sekiyu had nothing to be embarrassed about. Zyrolan, like Maomao, was only modestly endowed. Or it's fine, said Shisui. She herself was considerably more than fine. Fine indeed, Sekiyu exclaimed. I wish I was flat as a board. She looked at Maomao and Zyrolan. Xiaolan was beginning to look angry. Several of the women nearby had glinting eyes as well. She was going to make enemies at this rate, Maomao thought. Shisui seemed to have the same intuition. She passed Sekiyu an apron instead of her robe. Sure, I hear you. Come on, let's get to the baths, she said, giving Sekiyu a couple of encouraging pats on the shoulder. I knew she would be easy to tease, Maomao thought, but I never imagined it would be this easy. She followed Sekiyu and Shisui toward the bathing area. Sekiyu did not seem eager to expose her body, suggesting she came from a place where bathing was not common. She was from the same village as consort Jyokayu, which meant she was from the dry lands to the west. Water was a precious resource there. No wonder Sekiyu wasn't accustomed to bathing. They had saunas, but probably not any large bathhouses like this one. How have you been managing all this time? Out in the desert it might be one thing. However, around here, your body odor would turn noticeable very quickly if you didn't bathe routinely. Especially now during the hot season, simply wiping yourself down would likely not be enough. My older sisters come here, but I asked Lady Jyokayu for special permission. She allowed me to use the bath in the Jade Pavilion. Such amenities are ordinarily reserved for the lady of the house. His Majesty sometimes used them as well, but not for bathing exactly. We will omit the details of that. Maomao realized she had in fact seen Sekiyu heading for the Jade Pavilion's bath on several occasions. Even if she was only using the place after her mistress was finished, she had been intimidated enough to try not to draw attention to herself. It explained why the other sisters, who seemed so loyal to each other, had been so ready to sell Sekiyu out to Maomao. The youngest girl had consort Jyokai's permission to use the private bath, therefore they felt they could not drag her to the public one. But when Maomao had invited Sekiyu along, they saw their chance. Sounds like you're embarrassed, Maomao said, but there won't be any time for that once we get started here. Then she dipped a hand towel in a bucket and started cleaning herself off. If Sekiyu was reluctant to even let her chest be seen, what must she think of the consorts lying on the stone table without a thread on them? Jyokayu insisted on doing virtually everything herself. Sekiyu had probably never seen anyone quite like her before. She looked as though the whole thing was making her head spin, but Maomao did not have time to worry about her. Here, take this. Maomao passed her the perfume oil. You can at least rub it on them, right? Rub it on them. Aha, pretend you are marinating some chicken. Maomao added in a whisper that this would cause the women to relax, which would make them more talkative. Sekiyu frowned intensely, but slowly and fearfully began to daub the prone consort with oil. Xiaolan was becoming quite skilled at this task. She took some of the ointment and began to work it into the woman's skin. Maomao was still in charge of hair removal. Unlike massage, hair removal wasn't something one necessarily needed every day. Therefore, she was finished before Xiaolan and Shisui. This left her with little to do. She was sitting on the stone platform waiting for their next customer. She spotted a hesitant figure then. Well, look who it is. Consort Lishu was back. She had her chief lady in waiting with her again, and she was looking around uneasily. I wonder what is going on. Each of the upper consorts had her own bath at her pavilion. Lishu did not need to come all the way to the public bathhouse. She was so busy looking around nervously that she did not notice the bucket near her feet. She nearly tripped over it. It was very characteristic of her somehow. Lishu was one of the 4 upper consorts of the rear palace. She was something of a sheltered princess, still just 15 years of age. She had never received a visit from the emperor. Her chief lady in waiting was trying to hold her up. However, the floor was just too slippery, and Lishu came tumbling down. Maomao wondered if there were any other ladies she could rely on. She then thought of the women at the Diamond Pavilion and realized there was simply no one trustworthy among them. Finally, Maomao felt compelled to head over to Lishu. Some perfume oil had spilled on the stones. Maomao poured bath water over them to prevent anyone from tripping. Oh, thank you. The chief lady in waiting began, but her words of gratitude turned into a strangled shout when she saw Maomao. Lishu mirrored Maomao's horrified expression. Maomao gave them both a slight scowl. They were trembling like newborn foals. She wished they wouldn't stare at her as if she were a monster. She was good at picking up on cues, and she was about to return to the massage table when she noticed something. There were spots all over the trembling Li Shu's body where the hair hadn't been removed completely. It looked as if someone had tried to shave her with a razor, but they had left many scratches and even some cuts in places. "Would you like to try a different method of hair removal?" Maomao asked. "What?" Li Shu seemed surprised by the offer, but she did not resist when Maomao gently pulled on her hand. That was close enough for agreement. Maomao thought she still detected some faint trembling, but she was determined to ignore it. The shoddy shaving bothered her. Maomao was sometimes bothered by rather unusual things. She urged Li Shu onto the stone platform. The consort seemed to have the same reluctance as Sekiyu to expose her chest. Then she began to apply lotion, though she frowned a little as she did it. Xyrella noticed the cowering consort and the lady-in-waiting who stayed close to her. She quickly understood what was happening and helped to hold the consort on the table. "Do not worry," Maomao said. "I will be gentle." She was determined to do the best job she could. Sekiyu could only watch, her eyes full of sympathy for the consort. After the hair removal, Li Shu's skin was silky smooth. Maomao had barely noticed she hadn't stopped with her arms and legs. She had checked every inch of her body. Xyrella was carefully doing the aftercare, rubbing perfume oil on the consort. Shisui needed to help another customer, and that customer had given her some juice, which she was now enjoying. Xyrella was looking at her with envy. Should they try to ask consort Li Shu for an honorarium? Maomao wondered. Looking at the consort who was plastered to the table looking like her soul had left her body, she thought better of it. Is this sort of thing new to her? Maomao asked the chief lady-in-waiting. Yes. At the pavilion, most of the women do not pay much mind to these things, and before that she spent quite a while in a convent. Ah yes, that is right. In fact, Li Shu's story was rather a sad one when you thought about it. She was married off to a pedophile emperor as a political pawn at an early age. After his death she was sent to a convent. Then her family forced her back to the rear palace. And once there she was surrounded by good-for-nothing ladies-in-waiting. The chief lady-in-waiting had been among the consort's tormentors once, but now she was her mistress's staunch ally. This fact impressed Maomao. Since she was here anyway, Maomao thought she might as well make the chief lady's skin nice and smooth too. However, while the woman submitted to having her arms and legs done, she fiercely resisted when it came to her most sensitive parts. Maomao didn't see the problem. They were all women here after all. Once they had finished with consort Li Shu and her chief lady-in-waiting, their work was mostly done for the day. They put on loose robes and tried to cool off from the heat of the baths. Li Shu suggested some juice. It was possible she was simply being polite, hoping they would turn her down. However, the other girls eagerly accepted the offer. Xyrella was openly joyful. Sekiyu did not really understand what was happening, but he went along anyway. Other ladies were attending the other consorts. Shisui had slipped outside, where one of the consorts was treating her to a puff on a pipe. She knew how to play the game. "If I may ask," Maomao said to Li Shu's chief lady-in-waiting once they were settled in the consort's cooling-off area, "what brings you here? I thought the Diamond Pavilion had its own bath." "Yes, well," the lady-in-waiting said uneasily. She looked at Li Shu. Her face glowed with warmth from the baths, but it was beginning to regain its composure. In fact, she looked a little pale. That is where it appeared, in the bath. Now the lady-in-waiting looked as pale as her mistress. A Ghost Chapter 3 The Dancing Ghost. Sekiyu had looked very upset when she realized the retiring young lady was one of the upper consorts, but once Maomao heard the story, it would have been impossible to keep her from involving herself in it. And so it was that the next night, Hongyang told Maomao, "Sir Jinshi is asking for you." The food tasting was over. Maomao, who had been sipping her dinner of congee, quickly cleaned up her bowl. Sekiyu, who was eating with her, frowned but did not say anything. At the baths the day before, Maomao had recommended that consort Li Shu consult with Jinshi about the ghost. Maomao could not advise her on the matter directly. This was partly because Sekiyu's face said she would never allow it. But Maomao knew that if Li Shu asked Jinshi about it, the matter would likely be referred to her. And now it seemed she had been right. Maomao felt a chill run through her as she was ushered into the sitting room. She hadn't thought this all the way through. Gyukai was there along with Hongyang, as were Jinshi and Gaeshun. Jinchi wore his usual heavenly smile, but she thought she could see his mouth twitching. She thought, crap. Not long before, on a hunting expedition with Jinchi, Maomao had learned a terrible secret. Every man in the rear palace other than the emperor was supposed to be a eunuch, but she had discovered that one of them was not. Specifically, it was Jinchi himself. He had a rather fine specimen, and that was enough for Maomao to remember. She had finally gotten her ox bezoars. She would have been happy to pretend nothing else had happened. However, Jinchi seemed to have other ideas. This was the first time they had properly seen each other since the trip. While his lips were smiling, his eyes were not. He. And what kind of request brings you here today? Consort Jaikayu asked, grinning. Her natural curiosity made her want to stick her nose into all the various matters Jinchi brought to Maomao.